Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly or mostly weekly edition of the Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief.
And I'm Will Doran, WRAL State Government Reporter.
So we took last week off because the legislators have been on a hiatus now for just about 1 month. The last action was in the House on the 12th of July. Nothing happening since then, but we're expecting that will probably change next week.
Yeah, they say they're going to come back. Spoiler alert, maybe for some veto overrides. I think we'll probably tell you all about that a little bit later on. And, the budget work just continues, mostly behind closed doors, but, we're always trying to see what we can learn.
Right. And it was just this week, I think you were talking to either Speaker Moore or a spokeswoman who said that after all of their optimism, I would say, the week before, this week it was, we're not going to have anything before September.
Yeah, it was a really quick turnaround. I mean, late last week, Speaker Moore had told us, yeah, this will happen in a couple weeks, aka before August is over. And then I think that was on a Thursday, and then I think it was like Monday or Tuesday. It was like, oh yeah, no, never mind. This is going to drag into September. So something happened over the weekend to really, and early in the week to really, just put the kibosh on this.
Well, and this takes me back to people who've been around for a long time. Will remember Tony Rand, Senator Tony Rand, longtime Senate Rules Chairman, and he always talked about the blank moment, and it's a term that I can't really say, but it starts with an M. And he said that budget negotiations between the House and the Senate always they feel like they're going along, but you're not making a lot of progress, and everybody's got to get mad, and somebody's got to stand up at the table and call somebody else the N word, and then things tend to break loose. And so, and he was in, I don't know how many years of budget negotiations, right? He was one of the leaders of the Senate for many, many years. So he knows something. So maybe they hit that moment over the weekend, and this is going to be a good sign. And we're going to see things start to develop from here.
We'll see.
It's true. So one thing that we know might be a problem is the whole idea of the casinos, right? We've been talking about those for a while. And we heard from both Speaker Moore and Senator Berger that they believe that they should most properly be included in the budget because they would be a source of revenue for the state. But you're hearing that might be part of the problem.
Well, they say it should be included in the budget because it's a revenue thing. The real reason they want it to be included in the budget is because they know they don't have the votes to pass it on its own. I mean, you look at sports betting, which, did pass this year, but just kind of by a hair. And obviously allowing three or four casinos to be built around the state is a much, bigger step further than just sports betting for a lot of both the social conservatives and the people on the left who have opposed gambling. This is really one of those issues where you have some bipartisan support and bipartisan opposition whenever you get into issues like gambling. And so, they're trying to stick into the budget because, it can't pass on its own. But there, like I said, there's bipartisan opposition to this, and so I think that might be one of the things that is slowing down these budget negotiations. Is like they're like, okay, like especially from the real conservatives are like, you know, they're saying we're putting Medicaid expansion into this budget, we're putting casinos into this budget. Like this is not a conservative budget we've got going here, and so I think you've got a little bit of pushback on Republican leadership from the right wing of the party.
Well, one thing that is also getting delayed because of this is Medicaid. And we had heard that, they needed to get this done by the 1st of September in order for Medicaid to expansion to sort of take place beginning on October 1st. And that's what they've been aiming for, or at least DHHS has been taking steps to get that ready. But now that we're hearing no budget until possibly September, and that means it's going to get pushed back until December. And so DHHS Secretary Cody Kinsley was making the rounds of the media this week, talking about his concerns about that delay, about what's on the table, about not just the financial costs, I should say, to the state, which is about $500 million a month, but also the human costs of people who are rolling off the Medicaid rolls because of the end of the public health emergency, who would almost certainly still be on the Medicaid rolls if we had already gone ahead with expansion. But right now, they're losing the coverage that they had, and they're not able to get in under expansion. So he says, this is a sort of a slow moving tragedy for those folks, as well as the folks who've been waiting for this for a long time.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are, I think, have had health insurance, like you said, because of those COVID rules that made it a little bit easier to qualify for Medicaid. But now that those COVID rules are over, because President Biden ended them, they are about to lose their coverage. And yeah, especially coming up on the holidays and, cold season, flu season, all that, obviously not the time that people want to be uh, losing health insurance.
And I mean, on top of that, just in the last week or two, we heard about yet another rural hospital closing, and one of the points that Kinsley made is that Medicaid expansion will help to keep those doors open in those rural communities. Because, I mean, you may not realize this, I don't think I did, but 30 to 40% of people in a lot of those rural communities are uninsured. And the point Kinsley made to me, which I thought was a good one, is that, medical care in the US is a business, right? And if 30 to 40% of the people walking through your door can't pay you for what you're doing, then you probably don't have a business. So he's
Yeah.
making the case strongly, trying to push those rural lawmakers, I think, especially, although I think a lot of them don't really need much pushing because they've already seen this in their home turf, is really pushing to try to get this done.
Yeah, I mean that's really one of the reasons why Republicans have come around on this issue of Medicaid expansion. The more liberal areas of the state, the more urban areas are mostly fine with their hospitals because people work jobs that give them health insurance. But in the more rural areas, the more conservative areas, yeah, when you have 30, 40% of the population uninsured, yeah, that's just unsustainable for the local hospital.
Right. Now, in the meantime, Governor Roy Cooper also has been poking the lawmakers, telling them that they are acting like they're in Europe or something. I don't know what that's about. But anyway, one of the leaders in the House, Representative Jason Saine, has a podcast that he does every week. And this week on his podcast, he was talking about how he was sort of reacting to Cooper's prodding and just sort of said, well, they could just go ahead and pass some mini budgets for raises and things like that and be done with it. And obviously, that would be really problematic for Medicaid expansion because those would not be enough to trigger expansion to begin, as we've reported before in the past. Saine said on his podcast he's not in favor of expansion, so he wouldn't care especially. But you talked to Senate Leader Berger recently, right? And it didn't sound like that was really seriously an option.
Yeah, now I talked to Senator Berger before Representative Saine's podcast, so who knows? Maybe he listened to it and changed his mind. But when I talked to him, it was about a week ago. I asked him specifically about the issue of, you know, would you do many budgets, and if so, could that endanger Medicaid expansion? And he was like, look, we're not going to do many budgets. We did that a couple years ago. We didn't really want to. We're not doing it again this year. This year it's just a question of when the big budget passes.
Right.
It's not a question of if.
Now, in the meantime, you were at a meeting Wednesday, the criminal justice safety training, something along those lines. It
Yes,
had to
one
do,
of those big mouthfuls of
right,
bureaucratic words. Yeah.
right. So it had to do with the rules for people who train people to qualify for a concealed carry permit, right?
Yes. And there were, I mean, normally these meetings are, not really well attended at all. It's at Wake Tech at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, but there were 150 people there, all very passionately, well, almost all opposed to this. And most of them were concealed carry instructors.
We
And
should
what
mention
they've
that,
come
that
in.
this you're talking about is that the DOJ wanted to strengthen the rules, right? Or tighten the rules on those trainers.
Yes, yes, this commission wants more oversight on people who train concealed carry classes. And these people came in from all over the state. They drove in hours to say that that's not acceptable. Some of them took a very practical approach, so this is going to destroy my business model. Just some of the different rules, kind of requiring more time and more effort. Um, and others said, they just fundamentally opposed it because they viewed it as sort of a form of gun control. Now, what the state says is that they've had a lot of complaints recently about concealed carry instructors getting into all sorts of trouble, but not being able to do anything about it. There have been
Like,
allegations of people teaching classes while they're just stumbling drunk,
oh
which
my
is
gosh.
obviously not what you want to have, when someone's got a gun and is
So,
teaching other
so
people
does,
how to use
does
guns.
nobody have any oversight over them?
There's very little oversight. So this commission, which is also in charge of police officer oversight, does have oversight on these classes. But what they've found is they can't find witnesses to a lot of these allegations. It'll be like one person from the class will call and make a complaint, but then the state can't find out who else was at that class, and so they can't track down any witnesses, and then it just becomes a he said she said kind of thing.
So they
And
don't even have to keep records of who was in the class?
correct. Um,
Oh my gosh, like what
and
is the point?
Well, and so that's one of the rules that's being proposed is that they would have to start keeping records, and the state wouldn't automatically get those. The state could only look at those if there was an allegation that led to some sort of investigation into the instructor. But what we've heard from a lot of the people in the gun rights circles is like this is a slippery slope towards the government creating lists of all gun owners. So, in the future they could go door to door and round people up and take their guns. And so there's a lot of skepticism about this, even though the state is very clear. They're saying, look, these lists are not going to belong to us. They belong to you. We're only going to ask for them if there's a problem, if there's an investigation. We'll destroy the records once the investigation's over. But what I heard from a lot of people in the crowd is they just don't trust the government on that. They're like, well, sure, you can say that, but, we don't actually believe you. So, it was very passionate debate back and forth. It got delayed. They were going to take a vote this week. They decided since there was so much public outcry from this community that they're actually going to delay it until November. So, keep an eye on it this fall. It's going to be coming up again.
All right. Well, we're going to take a break right here for a message from our sponsor, we hope. We'll be right back after this. And we're back with a weekly edition of the Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief, here with Will Doran, one of our State House reporters. We were talking before the break about some of the budget delay, the Medicaid delay, and concealed carry. Something coming up Sunday has definitely got our attention, and that is No Labels petition. As some of you may be aware, the No Labels party group, I'm not sure, is petitioning the State Board of Elections to be added as a political party in North Carolina. The state board has been accused by No Labels of dragging their feet and requiring more documentation of this group than they have of other groups like the Libertarians, the Greens, the Constitution Party. However, they're supposed to take their final vote on this on Sunday at the statewide. The reason it's on Sunday is it's a statewide conference for election officials. And Will, it was very interesting. One of the attorneys for the State Board of Elections sent the group a letter recently asking them to explain some comments by their CEO who talked to NBC News back in July. And Nancy Jacobson is her name. And in this interview, she said, we're not a political party. Which
Yeah,
leads
so
us,
that's interesting when you're trying to be recognized as a political party, but your boss is telling the national news that you're not a political party.
I mean, I don't know what the relationship is between the big group, which is a 501 or 504. It's a social welfare group. I don't know what the relationship is between that bigger umbrella group and what the state organization would be. So maybe that's where the difference is. But just some things that said in that interview that were really sort of problematic for some of the materials that they've filed with the state board so far. So we'll be watching that vote closely. I should have a preview of that up pretty soon here on NC Capitol. Also, a preview of next week coming up. It looks like a lot of overrides next week.
Yeah, there's several really kind of big bills still out that Governor Cooper has vetoed that the legislature hasn't come back to override just because they've been on vacation, really. They haven't had the numbers, and while the governor has a time frame to veto bills, the legislature does not have a time frame to override the veto. They can do it whenever they feel like. But it sounds like we're going to get most, if not all of that, this coming week.
Yeah, so there's 5 bills in the House. There were 2 that had to do with charter schools, kind of loosening restrictions and regulations on them. There were 2 that targeted trans kids, LGBTQ kids, and there's 1 that has to do with building codes. And so all 5 of those are on the calendar, at least as far as we know, for Wednesday in the House. That's the plan at the time of this taping, which is Friday around noon. There is another veto to be taken up in the Senate, and that one is the Parents' Bill of Rights. But that's been in Rules Committee. It's not yet been calendared. Senator Berger did say that he does believe that they will take a veto override vote on that at some point, but that has not been scheduled yet.
Yeah, that's the Senate bill, so you would imagine that the Senate is interested in seeing it become law. But
Yeah, it has to start there under the rules, so it's got to go. It's interesting. It just hasn't moved. Also on Monday, the House Democrats are holding news conferences all across the state. It's a couple of weeks yet before it's back to school time, but they're pushing for a budget because they're talking about the problems that schools are having and staffing and funding for the new school year coming up. And then also next week, there's a chance we might hear something about the elections bills. You might remember the Senate passed a couple of big bills that would make some changes to elections, everything from changing what kind of affidavit, no, it wasn't an affidavit, sorry. It was how long absentee ballots could be accepted. Because this, right now they're accepted up to 3 days after election day. This would cut them off at election day evening, make a other bunch of big changes. We've been wondering if those were going to surface in the House or not. And so we're hearing Speaker Moore say that they probably will, but we're also being told that there's probably going to be some substantial questions or changes to those bills in committee. So it'll be interesting to see what emerges in the House version of those bills.
Yeah, that's the one that I've reported on extensively. And former attorney for Donald Trump, Cleta Mitchell, has been around the legislature pushing for some of these changes. So, she got some of what she wanted, not everything in the Senate version. So we're going to see in the House version if it's a little bit more friendly to her and her election integrity group.
I'm curious to see whether it goes farther or whether it goes less far. I don't
We'll
know.
see.
Huh?
We'll just have to wait and see.
We'll have to wait and see. And one last thing to add, a new entrant in the GOP primary, and not somebody that is a name that a lot of people have heard of.
Yeah, Jesse Thomas. I will admit I had never heard of him before. He announced his candidacy. He's a healthcare executive from Wake County, right?
Yeah, and I think he was on the board of trustees for I think it was UNC Pembroke, and I think he worked up in the Midwest as a political advisor, or maybe just a policy advisor to someone, but has not been a big figure in the North Carolina political scene so far. He's representing himself as a common sense Republican, sort of trying to draw some contrast between himself and Mark Robinson, who's the current front runner in that field. So still plenty of time for folks to get their hats into that ring, and I suspect we'll probably see a couple more before it's all over.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and like Mark Robinson, the front runner, Jesse Thomas is another Black Republican, and it'll be interesting to see whether the GOP, kind of makes a concerted push in 2024 to try to win more of the Black vote, especially as North Carolina is becoming a more and more diverse state here.
I think that's about all I have for this week. How about you, Will?
That's it.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. And we will, next week should be busy, and we'll keep you updated on all of it next week here on the Wrap. Thanks.